My name is Beatrice Bennett. I am 71 years old. For most of my life, I was a shopkeeper's wife and then a widow who learned to keep the books on her own. People in town remember me as the woman who always brought extra pies to church suppers, who kept a clean porch, who raised a son with steady hands. What they do not see is the cost of all that quiet duty, the way kindness can be mistaken for weakness when the years pile up. That morning began like any other. I drove myself into town, parked beneath the old maple that still leans across Main Street, and walked into the bank. The light inside was sharp, too bright, washing over the marble counters and glass partitions. I remember thinking it felt more like a hospital than a place of trust. The young clerk, his name was Mark, stood as I entered. His face looked practiced, polite, but his fingers tapped against the desk as though they had been waiting for me. He gestured toward the chair across from him. I sat down slowly, my purse on my lap, my heart steady. I thought perhaps there had been some mix-up with my statements, maybe a question about an old check. Instead, his voice faltered as he tried to find the words. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, his eyes flicking down to the folder in front of him. "Your son tried to close your account." The sentence landed with the sound of glass shattering, though nothing in the room moved. My breath did not catch. My body did not tremble. I simply sat there, as if the air itself had frozen around me. Mark hesitated, his throat tightened. He opened the folder. Inside was a set of documents neatly filled, every box completed. My name, my address, my date of birth. A doctor's letter attached, declaring me incapacitated. At the bottom, a notary stamp smeared, and next to it, a signature not mine at all, but in my husband's name. My husband, who has been gone for more than a decade. And below that, in bold letters, the name of the one who filed it, Daniel Bennett, my son. I looked at the paper, then at Mark, who was waiting for the collapse. He expected tears. He expected protest. But I remembered the boy with skinned knees who once cried when I threw away a broken toy he could not repair. Daniel never could let go of things, even when they were ruined, and now he was trying to claim me as ruined too. Mark whispered, "We did not process anything. We flagged it. We needed you here. If you want, I can help you revoke all access permanently." His hand shook as he slid a stack of forms across the polished desk. I placed my hand on the pen. For a moment, I stared at the weight of it. How strange that something so small could redraw the lines of an entire life. I thought of the years of giving, the checks written in quiet sacrifice, the trust that had become invisible. Then I pressed the pen to the paper. My name spread across the line, steady and whole. One form, then another, each signature a quiet strike of thunder. When I finished, I pushed the folder back and said the words that have stayed with me ever since. At the bank, the clerk hesitated. My son tried to close my account. I signed the paper, and in doing so, I closed his future. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. I stood, adjusted my coat, and walked toward the door. The October sun outside was too warm for the season. It pressed against my skin as though daring me to carry the weight of betrayal out into the open air. I paused at the threshold, my fingers brushing the cool leather of my purse. Inside it lay the documents, proof of his attempt, proof of his desperation. But deeper still, beneath all the paper and ink was something else. The certainty that this story was no longer about what my son had tried to take. It was about what I still had the power to keep. That was the beginning. And if you stay with me, I will tell you how I arrived at that chair, why my own blood thought I was unfit to carry my name, and how a woman who once defined herself only by giving finally learned the quiet strength of saying no. When I left the bank that day, clutching the envelope of forged papers in my purse, I did not drive straight home. Instead, I pulled into the small diner on the corner of Elm and 2nd, a place I used to take Daniel when he was a boy. I ordered black coffee. Black, though my doctor has warned me to cut back. They served it in thick white mugs, the kind that kept the heat for only a few minutes. I took a sip, but all I could think of was another mug, one that sits on the shelf in my kitchen. It is pale blue, chipped along the rim, with a faint ring where the glaze has thinned. My late husband, Robert, bought it at a yard sale the summer before our store opened. He told me it was nothing, just a cup, but I watched him drink from it every morning for 30 years. After he died, I kept it. It is the only one I still use. That cup has become an anchor in my life. When I wrap my hands around it, I feel steadier, as if his warmth still lingers. It is more than porcelain. It is memory. It is duty. It is the years I gave to a family that was built on sacrifices no one outside of me ever really saw. I spent 40 years beside Robert in our hardware store. People imagine small-town shopkeeping as simple. They do not see the late nights balancing ledgers, the winters when the heating bill was higher than the profit, the countless times we kept the lights on only because I rolled coins from a jar we had saved for emergencies. They do not see how many times I stitched together appearances so that our boy would not know how close we came to losing it all. When Robert passed, it was as if the air was knocked out of me. The store was mine to run, the house mine to maintain, the grief mine to carry. Daniel was grown by then, starting a life of his own, and I told myself that was enough. A son should not be burdened with his mother's despair. I never showed him the nights I stayed up, by the ledger, calculating whether to pay the supplier first or the mortgage. He never saw me selling my wedding ring to cover payroll one December. He never saw me pawn the bracelet my mother gave me on her deathbed, just to keep his college tuition paid on time. That is my unspoken truth. Not once did I tell him how many times I saved him. When his first business collapsed, I co-signed a loan, then refinanced my house to cover his debts. When he lost his job after the divorce, I wrote checks quietly, telling him they were advances against a future inheritance. He never asked where the money came from. He never asked what it cost me. I thought that was love, quiet, endless giving. I told myself that is what a mother does. That was who I was, the foundation. I held it all together while the weight grew heavier, and I never demanded recognition. I thought love meant erasing the evidence of my own effort, letting him stand taller while I sank lower into silence. But foundations crack. Mine did not collapse in a roar. It crumbled grain by grain, year after year, until finally my son decided it was easier to pretend I was unfit to stand at all. Sometimes I sit with that blue cup in my hands and think about what it really means to be needed. For decades, I was the one everyone leaned on, the one who could always be counted on to give just a little more. I see now that I built a world where my worth was measured only in what I could provide. And when I stopped providing, or when he feared I might no longer provide, my worth became disposable. I used to be the foundation, I tell myself in the quiet of my kitchen, but now they treat me as rubble. The truth is harder to swallow than any bitter coffee. Daniel was not always ungrateful. There were years when he hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. There were times he left notes on the kitchen table that said, "Thanks, Mom. Couldn't have done it without you." But as the years went on, those thanks turned into expectations. The requests became larger, the gratitude smaller, and still, I kept giving. It is easy to point to the moment in the bank and call it betrayal, but betrayal does not arrive all at once. It is built in layers. It begins with science, with the times we choose not to say no. It begins with a check written quietly, a lie told to protect someone we love, a sacrifice made without acknowledgement. I built those layers myself, brick by brick, until Daniel believed my sacrifices were not sacrifices at all, but obligations he was entitled to. That is the wound I carry. Not that my son forged papers in my husband's name, but that he believed he had the right to. He believed I had been the foundation so long that I would never claim the space above ground. I remember a winter night, maybe 15 years ago, when the furnace broke in Daniel's first apartment. He called me, shivering, embarrassed, but I drove over anyway with extra blankets, soup in a thermos, and $300 in cash. He said then, "You always save me." I smiled and said, "That's what mothers do." I see now how dangerous those words were. That's what mothers do. That was the cage I built for myself. Now, as I stand in the wreckage of forged signatures and false letters, I see the bars for what they are. I do not hate him. Hate is heavy, and I have carried enough. But I will not let him mistake my silence for consent anymore. That pale blue cup waits for me every morning. I hold it steady. I drink slowly. And with every sip, I remind myself, I am not rubble. I am not finished. My story is not over just because someone else tried to write its ending. I will tell it myself. The bank's fluorescent lights hummed faintly above us, a thin sound that made the silence feel sharper. Mark slid the folder closer, his hand pulling back quickly as if the paper itself might sting him. I opened it. Inside lay the so-called proof that I was no longer fit to live with my own name. The power of attorney form was filled in with precision that only highlighted its fraud. My own information sat there, my date of birth, my address, every detail correct except for the one that mattered most, the signature. It was written in a hand trying too hard to copy mine. The lines were shaky, uneven, letters leaning toward each other like drunks. My real signature has always been steady, each letter upright, clear, like the rows of tools Robert once displayed in our store window. This was not me. This was someone trying to wear my skin in ink. Attached was a doctor's letter, neat and formal, declaring me to be in the early stages of dementia. The words were cold, clinical, and false. The name at the bottom, Dr. Aaron Clymer, meant nothing to me. There is no such doctor in this town, nor had I ever been examined by anyone of that name. And then the notary stamp at the bottom, half smudged, half blurred, as if whoever pressed it down had been in a hurry. The seal was crooked, and next to it, in bold type, the words, "Filed by Daniel Bennett." I sat still, letting the weight of it press into me without rushing to throw it off. People think that betrayal announces itself with thunder, but more often it comes in this way. Typed lines, forged loops of ink, a stamp tilted on paper. Mark leaned forward carefully. "Mrs. Bennett, I know this is difficult." I looked at him and then back at the form. My son's name burned against the page like it had been etched into my skin. He had reached for the only power I had left, my autonomy, and tried to make it his. My silence seemed to rattle Mark. His fingers tapped once on the desk. "We didn't process anything. We were concerned, and that's why I asked you here." He hesitated again, his throat dry. "If you'd like, I can walk you through the steps to revoke all prior authorizations. We can flag your account permanently. No one would be able to make changes without you in. Person with identification. I did not break. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand how he could, how dare he, what gave him the right. Those questions had already been answered by the paper in front of me. He dared because he thought I was too tired to resist. He dared because he believed the years of my giving had turned me into something pliable, something that could be folded away. Instead, I said, "Show me what I need to sign." Mark blinked. "Most people cry," he admitted softly. "You didn't." The words landed heavy. They were not praise, not judgment, only observation. I could feel Robert's pale blue cup in my mind, its chipped edge, the way it had survived years of being knocked around. I was not porcelain to be shattered. I was stone that had been mistaken for dust. He placed another stack of forms before me, the paper crisp, smelling faintly of ink and toner. I held the pen, my fingers steady. One by one I signed each page, my name flowing like it always had, upright and clear. With each stroke, I felt the shift of something inside me, the quiet turning of a wheel long ignored. When the last line was signed, I set the pen down deliberately, not as a gesture of fatigue, but as an act of closure. My voice was even when I said, "He will find no door here anymore." Mark nodded, sliding the documents into a folder. His jaw was tight, as though he wanted to say more, to offer comfort, to reach across the divide of professional distance. Instead, he cleared his throat and said only, "The protections are in place now. No one but you." I rose slowly, my body upright, not bowed. The papers Daniel had filed remained on the desk for evidence, a small pile of deceit bound by a paperclip. I left them there, proof not only of his attempt, but of my refusal to collapse. As I stepped toward the door, Mark's voice followed me. "You're stronger than most, Mrs. Bennett." I did not answer. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is the refusal to cry where others expect tears. Sometimes it is the choice to keep walking without looking back. Outside, the October sun still felt too warm, pressing against my shoulders as if daring me to falter. But I did not. I moved forward with a clarity I had not felt in years. For the first time, I understood that silence can be power when it is chosen, when it is deliberate. In my purse, the envelope still held his false claim over me. But in my hands, steadied by signatures that could not be forged, I carried something greater. The beginning of a boundary, the first brick in a wall he could no longer climb. I drove home slowly, my reflection in the rear-view mirror calm, almost unfamiliar. The woman staring back was not the one who had written endless checks, not the one who had bent quietly under every request. She was someone who had looked at the evidence of her own erasure and answered it not with collapse, but with ink, steadier than ever. And as the road unspooled ahead of me, I whispered only to myself, "Most people cry. I didn't." When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as always. White siding, roses clinging stubbornly to the porch rail. But the quiet carried a different weight. I unlocked the door, set my purse on the table, and went straight to the cabinet in the hallway. Inside, tucked behind old photo albums and a jar of mismatched buttons, was a worn brown folder. I pulled it out, its edges frayed from years of being opened, closed, then opened again. It contained the story of my giving, though no one else had ever read it. I laid the folder on the dining table. The room smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner. Sunlight angled through the blinds, falling across the wood in stripes. For a long moment, I just stood there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then I opened the folder. Checks. Dozens of them. Some faded to near illegibility, others still sharp with ink. Each one had a memory attached, whether I wanted it or not. The first was from years ago, when Daniel's football team needed new jerseys. He had come to me with those pleading eyes, insisting he could not stand out as the only boy without one. Robert had said no. I had said yes. $20 then, and I told myself it was harmless. Just this once. Another for his college tuition, written in shaky relief after we had emptied nearly every jar of savings. Just this once. Then for the rent on his first apartment, after his roommate left him stranded with the bill. Just this once. A check for the down payment on his house, written the week after Robert's funeral, when my own grief should have been enough to carry. Just this once. A check for his wedding expenses, flowers, tuxedos, photographs, because he wanted to start his life with pride. Just this once. And then again, after the marriage ended, another check for therapy sessions he swore would help him put himself back together. Just this once. It went on and on. Car repairs, medical bills, credit card debt. 43 checks in total, each one a quiet carving away of myself. Alongside them, printouts of wire transfers, loan guarantees, insurance forms with his name written in boxes where mine should have been. I spread them across the table until the wood was no longer visible. They looked like tiles in a floor built entirely of sacrifice. I sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath me. My hands hovered over the page of hers. My chest was tight, but my eyes were dry. This was not a moment for tears. One by one, I began adding the amounts, writing them in my notepad. $20, $2,000, $10,000, $50 here, $100 there. Each line another notch on the ledger of what had been taken, disguised as given. By the time I finished, the total glared up at me. $396,480, nearly $400,000, a number so large it did not look real. Yet every digit had come from my own pen, my own account, my own willingness to believe that love was enough reason to hand over everything. I set the pen down. My fingers trembled only once when they brushed the edge of the notepad. Then I pushed the paper away, stood, and walked into the kitchen. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and waited. The flame hissed to life. I leaned against the counter, listening to the water grow restless, then furious, then loud enough to whistle. I poured it carefully into the blue cup, watching steam curl upward like the breath of something long hidden. The smell of black tea filled the room, earthy and familiar. I carried the cup back to the table, sat down, and wrapped both hands around it. The warmth seeped into my palms. I let it anchor me. The papers lay scattered before me, harsh against the soft light that now slanted through the window. Dust motes drifted in the air, catching the glow as if time itself was pausing to watch. I lifted the notepad again, and beneath the long column of numbers, I wrote 3 words: "It ends here." I underlined them once, slowly. The ink bled a little into the page, but the letters stood strong. For years, I had told myself that each gift was temporary, that my son would one day stand tall enough to no longer lean on me. For years, I had said just this once, but once had multiplied into a lifetime. The truth lay in front of me, undeniable. Love had become a ledger. Kindness had turned into currency. And I had been the bank he never thought would close. I sipped the tea, its bitterness steady on my tongue. I stared at the words until they sank into me, until I could feel them take root in a place that had been barren for too long. It ends here. The clock ticked on the wall. The light shifted as the sun began its descent, and for the first time in decades, I felt not drained, but certain. This was no longer about saving Daniel. This was about saving myself. The next morning, I rose before the sun. The house was still, the blue cup waiting on the counter as always. I filled it, drank slowly, and let the warmth settle into me. The papers from last night remained on the dining table, the total of nearly 400,000 staring back at me like a scar. I did not move them. They were evidence now, not just memories. At 9 o'clock sharp, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. When Robert passed, she was the one who helped me sort through the will and the store accounts, the one who explained each clause without condescension. Clara Rhodes, an attorney, neighbor once removed, and woman known in town for her sharp eyes and silver hair cut in a blunt line that made her look unshakable. Her voice on the other end was exactly as I remembered, steady, clipped, and patient. Rhodes Law. "Clara, it's Beatrice Bennett." There was a pause, then a shift in tone, softer but alert. "Beatrice, it's been some time. What can I do for you?" "I need to change my will." My voice did not falter, though the words tasted strange, heavy. She did not ask for details. She simply said, "Come in this afternoon. I'll clear the schedule." By 2 o'clock, I was walking up the stone steps of her office, a restored Victorian house that had been converted into a firm years ago. The brass plaque on the door shone in the pale sunlight. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. Clara rose from behind her desk when she saw me. Her hair was as silver as I remembered, her eyes bright and unflinching. She extended her hand and I took it, feeling the firmness of her grip. "Beatrice," she said, gesturing toward a leather chair across from her. "Sit. Tell me." I laid the envelope from the bank on her desk, then the notepad with the tally of checks. She looked at each in silence, her lips pressed together. Finally, she asked the question that hung in the air. "Do you want to press charges?" The words lingered between us like smoke. I thought of Daniel, of the forged signature, of the way he had used Robert's name like a tool. I thought of Lily, my granddaughter, whose visits were the only ones not attached to requests. "Not yet," I said evenly. "I want my granddaughter safe first." Clara nodded once slowly. Her pen hovered over the yellow pad on her desk. "Then we begin by revoking every prior authorization. No power of attorney remains valid. He will have no legal path to your accounts, your property, your estate." "Yes," I answered, "and I want to set up a trust for Lily." Her pen paused mid-sentence. She lifted her eyes to mine. "For Lily, not for him. She's the only one who still calls me because she wants to, not because she needs something." Something flickered in Clara's expression then, not pity, not surprise, but something like respect. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Most come to beg," she said quietly. "You come to build." The words caught me off guard, though I did not show it. Build. It had been so long since I thought of myself in those terms. For years I had patched, repaired, salvaged, but not built. We spent the next hour reviewing documents. Clara explained each step carefully, though she never softened her tone to the point of patronizing. Her respect was its own kind of comfort. She spoke of irrevocable trusts, of legal shields, of language that could not be bent by pleading or threats. As she read aloud the lines that would remove Daniel from every future claim, I listened to her voice as though it were stone being laid, one block at a time. It felt less like erasure and more like construction, something sturdy, something lasting. When she placed the papers before me, I signed each one with the same hand that had signed so many checks over the years. Only this time, the ink did not bleed into obligation. It marked a boundary. When it was done, Clara gathered the stack, tapped it neatly on the desk, and looked at me squarely. "This protects you. It protects Lily. He cannot touch this." I felt the weight of the blue cup again, even though it sat miles away in my kitchen. That chipped porcelain had survived decades. So had I. I stood, smoothing the skirt of my navy dress. "Thank you, Clara." Her expression softened for just a moment. "You waited too long, Beatrice, but you're here now, that counts." I left her office and stepped out into the fading afternoon light. The air felt sharper, cleaner, as if the act of signing had cleared something more than legal ties. The world outside went on as though nothing had changed, cars moving, leaves falling, but I knew something had shifted. In my purse, the documents rustled with each step, a quiet reminder that silence had transformed into strength. I was no longer the foundation others could stand on freely. I was building something for myself and for Lily and no one else. That evening, when the shadows began to stretch long across the street and the air grew sharp with the scent of fallen leaves, I heard the sound of a car pulling into my driveway. A familiar rattle followed, the muffler of Lily's old hatchback. She had not called first, which was unusual for her. By the time I opened the door, she was already halfway up the steps, a paper bag cradled in her arms. "I brought soup," she said simply, holding it out as though it might be an offering strong enough to mend the day. She was 20 now, in her second year of college, working evenings at the bookstore near campus. The ink smudges on her fingers were always there, ghosts of receipts and book spines. Her jacket was thrifted corduroy, 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled up. She looked every inch her generation, unvarnished, practical, and unafraid of showing the seams. I stepped aside. "Come in, Lily." The house smelled faintly of tea and paper, the notepad still open on the table with the words I had written earlier. "It ends here." She set the soup on the counter, removed the lid, and the steam curled upward, filling the kitchen with the scent of chicken and thyme. She glanced at the papers spread out on the dining table. Her brow furrowed, but she did not touch them. Instead, she asked quietly, "Do you want me to know?" "Yes," I said. "Sit down." We settled across from each other. I poured tea into the pale blue cup for myself and into a plain white mug for her. The steam rose between us, softening the space. I began with the bank, the forged signature, the doctor's letter. I told her about the nearly $400,000 I had traced back through the years. Her face shifted as I spoke. Shock, sorrow, anger, but she let me finish without interruption. When I finally grew quiet, she stirred her soup with a spoon she hadn't yet used. The silence stretched, but it was not heavy. It was thoughtful, deliberate. Then she asked, "Grandma, do you hate him?" The question stopped me more than anything else. It carried no malice, only the honest curiosity of youth trying to understand where love and betrayal meet. I took a slow sip of tea before answering. The heat steadied me. "Hate is heavy, Lily. I just put it down." Her eyes widened, then softened. "But after everything, how could you not?" I shook my head. Because carrying hate would mean he still owns something inside me, and he doesn't anymore. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. Her spoon clinked softly against the bowl. "I don't know if I could do that," she admitted. When someone hurts me, I want them to feel it back. Maybe it's my age. Maybe it's just the world we live in. Everyone's always posting, shouting, proving. I don't think I'd be quiet about it. I smiled faintly. Your way is not wrong. It is just different. I was raised to keep things inside, to survive by swallowing the noise. My silence was my shield, but silence can also be a prison. She looked at me closely. So which is it for you now, a shield or a prison? I thought about that, tracing the rim of the blue cup with my finger. It used to be a prison. Today, maybe for the first time, it feels like a shield again. Chosen, not forced. Her lips curved into a small, uncertain smile. You're stronger than I thought. No, I said gently. You just didn't know where to look. She reached across the table then, her hand warm against mine. Her palm carried the faint roughness of someone who worked, who lived in the texture of books and paper. I believe you, she said. That moment, her hand on mine, the steam of soup rising, the tea cooling slowly, was a mirror. I saw the difference between us, yes, but also the thread that bound us. She lived in a world where truth was shouted into glowing screens, where boundaries were drawn in bold lines. I lived in one where truth was whispered into ledgers and folded into kitchen drawers. But here, in this room, we met in the middle. She studied with me for a while. So, what happens now? I have already taken steps. Clara helped me secure everything. A trust has been created for you. Her eyes widened. For me? Grandma, I know you didn't ask. That is why it's yours, because you come here not for money, not for favors. You come here because you love me. That matters. She pressed her lips together, fighting back tears. Then she whispered, I don't deserve that. None of us ever do, I said, but it's not about deserving. It's about choosing. I chose you. The words seemed to land deep inside her. She blinked quickly, nodding, though she said nothing for a while. When she finally spoke again, her voice was lower. He's going to hate me for this. No, I said softly. He's going to blame you. That's different. Hatred takes effort. He has never worked that hard for anyone. Her laugh came sharp, almost bitter, but it cracked into something lighter. You're colder than I remember. I lifted my cup, inhaled the steam, and replied, no, just finally warm enough for myself. The kitchen fell quiet again. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, scattering leaves along the porch. Inside, we sat together, 2 generations divided by time but joined by choice. I realized then that Lily was not just my granddaughter. She was a mirror showing me what I had carried too long and what I could finally put down. She represented the possibility that love could exist without chains, that loyalty could be given freely, not demanded. Hate is heavy, I repeated quietly, and we don't have to carry it anymore. She nodded, her eyes clear now. Then let's not. And at that moment, I felt lighter. Not because the battle was over, it was far from finished, but because I had someone beside me who believed in more than survival. She believed in me. The whispers came before the week was out. I felt them before I heard them, like a draft under a closed door. It started with a phone call from Pastor Helen, her voice careful, wrapped in cotton. Beatrice, I thought you should know. Daniel stopped by the church yesterday. He seemed concerned. I asked what he had said. She hesitated. He wanted to know if I had noticed any signs, forgetfulness, confusion. He mentioned the word dementia. The silence on my end must have been long, because she cleared her throat nervously. I told him I had seen no such thing, but I thought you deserved to know what's being said. I thanked her, my voice even, and hung up. My tea had gone cold in the blue cup beside me. I stared at it, at the line of glaze worn thin near the rim, and thought, of course. If he could not take my accounts with forged paper, he would try to take my reputation with whispered words. It did not stop at the church. At the grocery store, 2 women in the produce aisle hushed their voices when I walked past. One glanced at me, pity in her eyes, then back to her apples as though I could not see. At the pharmacy, the clerk asked too brightly if I needed help remembering my prescriptions. And then came Sunday. The potluck. I had debated not going, but staying home would have been its own kind of surrender. So I made my dish, scalloped potatoes the same as I had brought every year, and carried it into the fellowship hall. The room smelled of casseroles and coffee, the murmur of conversation filling the air. I set my dish on the table, picked up a paper plate, and moved down the line like always. But the air shifted when I reached the mashed potatoes. Eyes. Too many of them. Glances flicked and averted, the kind that linger a heartbeat too long. Smiles are too soft, too pitiful. People I had known for decades, who once sought my advice on marriages, on gardens, on grief, now looked at me as if I were already half gone. I spooned a portion of potatoes onto my plate, the motion steady, deliberate. My hand did not shake. I did not explain myself. I did not protest. I did not announce the truth like a defense attorney in a courtroom. Because silence, when chosen, is not surrender. It is a verdict. I found a seat near the edge of the room, ate my food quietly, and let the hum of voices wash over me. Snatches reached my ears, phrases like poor thing and such a shame, but I kept my gaze steady on my plate. Each bite was measured, each swallow calm. I would not give them the performance Daniel and Marjorie wanted, the trembling hands, the confusion, the public collapse. Instead, I ate my meal, finished my tea from the thermos I had brought, and when it was done, I stood, carried my empty plate to the trash, and walked out into the sunlight. The air outside was crisp, honest in its chill. The maple leaves rattled overhead like coins in the wind. Let them talk, I thought. Let them repeat his story in kitchens and pews. I had already decided on mine, and though my silence burned on their tongues, inside it felt clean, steady, unmovable. Because silence is not surrender, it is a verdict. It was a Tuesday morning when his car pulled into my driveway. I knew the sound before I saw it. Too smooth, too new to be anything but the one he had bought last year, the kind of car whose payments stretched farther than cents. He let the engine idle for a moment as if gathering his breath before stepping out. The October air had a bite to it. The sky was clear but pale, the kind of blue that carried no warmth. I sat on the porch with my shawl pulled around me, the blue cup in my hands. Steam rose steadily from the tea, curling into the air before the breeze tugged it apart. Daniel smoothed his jacket, ran a hand through his hair, and walked up the steps with that practiced calm of his, the kind he used in business meetings, as though every conversation was already decided in his favor. He stopped 2 feet from me, hands in his pockets, shoulders squared. "Mom," he said, "you won't return my calls." "No." My answer was plain, nothing more. He nodded, as if I had confirmed something he already believed. I wanted to talk in person. The steam from my tea drifted between us. I did not move. "I know things got misunderstood," he began. I lifted my eyes to his. "You forged a letter." His jaw tightened. "That's not how I would put it." "By forging your father's name?" My voice was calm, steady, though inside I felt the crack of something deeper, sharper. He shifted his weight, the breeze tugging at his coat. "I thought we had an understanding, that I'd help manage your affairs. You're not exactly getting younger. Do you think I've made it 71 years just to forget who I am?" The words rose in me, but I kept them even. "Do you really believe that's protection? Lying to a bank? Declaring me incompetent?" "I was protecting you," he snapped, though his tone still carried that veneer of control. "By stealing?" I asked quietly. He exhaled through his nose, frustrated. "You don't get it. This is how the world works now. Things need to be in order. If something happened to you, if you slipped, if you forgot," I cut him off, voice still calm. "You didn't ask. You stole." The silence after that was long. The wind rustled the dry leaves along the porch steps. My tea's steam thinned, then rose again with the next sip. He tried again, softer this time. "People are going to talk. About you. About all this. You're making it harder than it needs to be." I let the weight of his words hang in the air before answering. "You already made it hard. I'm just done pretending it isn't." His eyes flickered, just once, a crack in the mask. "So that's it? After everything I've done, you cut me off?" I looked at him for a long moment. "What exactly have you done for me, Daniel, that wasn't transactional?" His mouth opened, then closed. No answer. Lily's the one who calls, who visits, who asks how I'm doing without expecting something in return. She's twice the man you ever were. The words landed. I saw them sink in, not as cruelty, but as truth. Raw and unavoidable. He tried one more time. I needed help. I didn't know how else to ask. "You didn't ask," I repeated. "You stole." The breeze caught his jacket again. His shoulders hunched slightly, as if against the chill, though I suspected it was something colder than October air. We stood there in our separate silences, both wrapped in our own histories. Then, with the same deliberate pace I had used at the bank, I rose from my chair. I carried my blue cup into the house. At the door, I turned back to him once. "You could have had everything, Daniel. Not my money, my trust. Now you have neither." And with that, I closed the door. Not slammed, not locked for drama. Just closed it slowly, deliberately, the sound firm enough to end the conversation. Behind me, the house seemed to exhale, as though it had waited a long time for someone to do exactly that. On the porch, I imagined him standing there, hands still in his pockets, the breeze tugging at his coat, steam from my tea lingering faintly in the air. But inside, the quiet was mine again, and I knew this was not the end of his attempts, but it was the end of my silence. 2 days after Daniel stood on my porch and called theft protection, the doorbell rang again. It was late morning, the sun was thin and bright, the yard smelled faintly of damp leaves. I had just poured hot water into the blue cup when I heard the measured rhythm on the door. Not neighborly, not tentative. A cadence that announced itself as reasonable before it spoke a word. Through the glass I saw Marjorie. Camel coat, hair pulled so tight it sharpened her features. A leather clipboard tucked to her chest like a shield. She did not smile when I opened the door. She arranged her mouth into something that suggested cooperation without surrender. "Beatrice," she said, "I think we should talk." "I prefer the porch," I replied. I stepped outside and let the screen door settle between us and my home. She descended one step and then stopped, as if positioning herself in good light. "We can avoid any unpleasantness if we handle this as a family," she said. "There has been a swell of misunderstanding. Rumors grow legs in small towns. You know how it is. For the sake of family unity, we would like to propose a mediated agreement." The steam from my tea rose and curled into the colder air. I waited. She filled the silence with her training. A neutral location, a neutral facilitator, a simple plan that protects everyone, she continued. It will spare you the stress of formal proceedings and spare all of us the spectacle of public drama. I lifted the cup and took a slow sip. Unity without honesty, I said, is just chains by another name. Her nostrils flared before she smoothed her face. No one is chaining anyone. We are trying to prevent chaos. Daniel is under tremendous pressure at work. People are asking questions he cannot answer without violating your privacy. The church committee has concerns about your recent confusion. They have asked whether you still want to coordinate the holiday drive. "The committee can call me," I said, "directly." Marjorie ignored that. She unclipped a stack of papers. I heard the snap of metal, a crisp, deliberate sound. "This is a proposal to consolidate assets into a family account. Temporary, of course. With you as senior signatory, with a co-trustee who can ensure your wishes are maintained without error." She tapped the top page with a manicured nail. "A mistake now could be catastrophic for your legacy." I let her words sit in the open air. A sparrow landed on the rail, thought better of it, and darted away. "Who is the co-trustee?" I asked, "in this simple plan that protects everyone?" She did not hesitate. "I would serve." There it was. The heartbeat beneath the polite phrases. Not concern, not unity. Control. "For Lily's sake," she added quickly. Young people lack the discipline for fiduciary decisions. We can structure distributions for her benefit while maintaining the principle. She should not be tempted by sudden access to funds she has not earned. Earned? I repeated. I watched the steam from my cup thin and disappear. You mean the trust I created because she is the only one who visits without asking for something? Marjorie's smile hardened. You are choosing one grandchild over the stability of the entire family system. I have one grandchild, I said. Her name is Lily. Her voice cooled. You are making this adversarial. No one is threatening you. You came to my door with a clipboard, I said, and a plan to move what is not yours into a place where you can reach it. She drew a breath. She aimed for the patient. Beatrice, if you refuse to cooperate, things will escalate. There will be legal scrutiny. There will be questions about capacity. There will be consequences for your public standing. People listen to narratives long before they read documents. I held her gaze. The breeze touched the porch and lifted the edge of my shawl. In the kitchen behind me, the kettle ticked as it cooled. Somewhere down the block, a truck changed gears. The world continued. I am not negotiating my dignity, I said. She tilted her head as if I were an interesting line item. You are being emotional. This is a practical solution. You retain comfort. We retain order. Lily receives guidance. Daniel receives relief. The town receives calm. Calm, I said, is not the same as truth. She pressed the pages toward me. You can sign here to authorize an interim advisory role on the trust. It is reasonable. It is temporary. It is the kind of thing people do when they care about family. I did not take the pen. I studied the top sheet the way I had studied the forged power of attorney. The legalese tried to soften the bleed. I could see where the clauses narrowed like a funnel toward control. I could hear Lily's voice in my mind, unsure but clear. And the echo of Clara's sentence, most come to beg, you come to build. Marjorie's eyes flicked toward the street, then back to me. Refusal will look uncooperative. Judges do not like uncooperative parties. Pastors do not like them either. I let the silence widen until she had to feel it. Power lives in the space where I do not rush to fill her assumptions. Finally, I said, unity without honesty is chains. You are asking me to hand you a chain. I am asking you to avoid regret, she said. Lily is impressionable. You are teaching her to choose sides against her father. She's learning to choose the truth, I replied. There is a difference. Marjorie's mouth tightened. If you sign, we will drop any inquiries. If you do not, we will pursue them. I looked down at the papers. My reflection ghosted faintly in the glossy margin. I lifted my cup and drank the last of the tea. The steam was gone. The flavor held. Then I set the empty cup on the porch table and placed my hand on the doorknob. No, I said. I will not sign. Her shoulders squared. The clipboard rose like a shield again. You are making a mistake that will ripple for years. Possibly, I said, but it will be my mistake, not yours. She waited for me to blink first. I did not. The breeze picked up and tugged at the corner of the top page. For a moment, the paper lifted, then settled. Even the wind refused to carry it into my house. Good day, Marjorie, I said. I stepped backward. The screen door touched my hip. The threshold was firm beneath my heel. I was careful with the final motion, the one that mattered. I closed the door slowly, without drama, registering the quiet click as if it were a signature. Not a slam, not a retreat, a line. Behind the wood, my home exhaled. I stood for a moment in the hallway and let the hush press against me like a blessing. Then I walked to the phone on the kitchen wall and dialed Clara. When she answered, I spoke simply. There was an attempt to secure a co-trusteeship via my porch. I declined. Please note the date. Clara understood without commentary. Documented, she said. We will be ready if they try again. I hung up and rinsed the blue cup. The water ran hot over porcelain. The chip on the rim caught the light. Outside, I could hear Marjorie's measured heels on the steps, the car door, the engine, the receding insistence of someone who had expected compliance and met a boundary instead. Reversal is not thunder. It is a quiet door, a steady hand. A woman standing where she lives and deciding who is allowed to enter. I booked the room with a single phone call. The woman at the library asked if it was for a book club. No, I said. It's for anyone who has ever been told they are too old to matter. She hesitated, then penciled me in for Wednesday at 7. That night, I printed 20 flyers on my home printer. The ink smeared at the edges, but the words were legible. A quiet retelling. Edith Beatrice Bennett, Wednesday. Free, open to all. I taped 5 at the coffee shop, 2 at the florist, and gave 1 to Pastor Helen without explanation. She only nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. By the time I walked into the small community room, folding chairs were already half filled. The overhead lights glowed a dull yellow, warming the plain walls. I recognized half the faces, women from church, an old neighbor, even the man who once ran the funeral parlor. Others were strangers, 2 young women with notebooks, a man in a worn cap holding a thermos. In the back, leaning against the wall with arms folded, was Marjorie. Daniel did not come himself. I carried my thermos of tea and a notebook. No microphone, no podium, but a narrow table. When I stepped to the front, the scrape of chairs settled into a hush. My name is Beatrice Bennett, I began. I have lived in this town since I was 21. I built a hardware store with my husband, raised a son, buried a husband, and paid my taxes. And I am not senile. I am not confused. I am not fragile. But I am tired of silence. A ripple moved through the room. I opened my notebook but did not read. Instead, I spoke from memory, from marrow. I told them about the bank, about the forged power of attorney, about my dead husband's name scrawled where it did not belong. I told them about the doctor's letter, the notary stamp smudged at the bottom. I told them how the clerk hesitated, his hand shaking, and how I signed the form that closed not just access to my accounts, but to my son's future. I told them about the folder at home. 43 checks, years of just this once, the total of nearly 400,000. I told them how Daniel and Marjorie spun stories of dementia, of confusion, while neighbors turned their glances into pity. My voice stayed calm, steady, no trembling, no collapse. Each line was a nail driven into wood, truth hammered in without flourish. And then I said, "Don't hand your eraser to the person who wants to rewrite you." The room drew in a breath. Some heads nodded. One woman pressed a tissue to her nose. Marjorie's expression did not flicker, but I saw her knuckles tighten around her clipboard. I told them about Lily, about how she came with soup, about how she asked me if I hated her father, and how I answered, "Hate is heavy." I put it down. I did not beg for sympathy. I did not ask for applause. I simply laid the story out piece by piece until it filled the room. When I finished, I closed my notebook. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was thick, reverent, the kind that lets truth settle before anyone dares disturb it. No one clapped. They did not need to. Some stood and shook my hand. Some hugged me. Others simply nodded with eyes wet. I accepted each gesture with the same quiet grace. Emma, my Lily, was there too. She came to me last, her arms wrapping around me as if she could hold together everything the world had tried to pull apart. She whispered, "You look taller tonight." And I laughed softly, because that is what happens when you stop carrying shame. When I left the library, the night air was cool and open. The street lamps glowed faintly, moths circling their light. Behind me, the folding chair sat empty, but the silence of that room traveled with me. Proof that once spoken, truth cannot be taken back. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, thick envelope, my name typed neatly on the front. No law firm this time, no heavy stationery, just Daniel's handwriting on the return address. My stomach knew what my eyes had not yet read. I set it on the table beside my blue cup. The kettle was already hissing and I poured the water, watching the steam rise. The glaze on that cup caught the morning light, the small chip near the rim familiar as my own reflection. I wrapped both hands around it, steady, before I slit the envelope open. Inside, 3 pages folded precisely. I knew his hand before I saw the words. Letters too tall, R's shaped like half-finished B's. I unfolded slowly and began to read. "Dear Mom, I'm sorry things have gotten to this point. I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. The paperwork at the bank was just a precaution. You're getting older, and I was trying to make sure things were in order. I didn't forge anything. Maybe someone else made a mistake. I realize now that maybe I should have communicated better. I've been under a lot of stress at work, and Lily's tuition has been a burden. I thought if I could just manage things better, we'd all be better off. I never meant to hurt you. Please call me. I'm worried about you. I hope you can forgive me. I read every word twice. Then once more, slower. Precaution. That was what he called it. Using his dead father's name, drafting a doctor's letter about dementia that did not exist, handing it to a clerk at the bank. A precaution. Worried about me. That line cut sharper than the rest. Not sorrow, not ownership, just another attempt to fold his theft into concern. I placed the pages flat on the table, smoothed them with my palm, and stared at the steam curling from my cup. My hand did not shake. Then I tore the letter in half, again and again, until the pieces were too small to carry meaning. The fragments lay scattered across the table like snow, meaningless at last. The kettle clicked as it cooled. I refilled the cup, the porcelain warm against my fingers. Each sip was steady, each swallow deliberate. That letter was his cost, not mine. His words would not take root here. Later that afternoon, I called Clara. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk. "There's been a letter," I said. "From him?" "Yes. Half apology, half denial. He called it a precaution." Her laugh was dry, almost sharp. That's the language of desperation. They know the forged documents won't stand scrutiny. They know the trust is out of reach. I glanced at the scraps still on the table. He thinks words can still bend truth. "Let them spend money on lawyers," Clara said firmly. "They'll bleed retainer fees while you sit at your kitchen table drinking tea. That's the real balance now." I smiled into the phone, though she couldn't see it. "My cup doesn't tremble." "And it shouldn't," she replied. "You've taken back the pen. They can only throw paper now, and paper burns fast when it's built on lies." After we hung up, I swept the torn fragments of Daniel's letter into a small envelope and tucked it into the drawer where the old checks and records lived. Not to keep them alive, but to remind myself, silence can cost the guilty more than any confrontation. As evening fell, I sat at the kitchen table again, the blue cup before me. Outside, the street grew quiet, porch lights blinking on one by one. My house breathed with me, calm, unshaken. I thought of his phrase again, precaution. I whispered it into the still room, then I whispered mine, verdict. That night, I slept without dreams. The envelope came by certified mail. The courier required my signature, standing on the porch with his clipboard, polite but hurried. When I closed the door, the house fell into its usual hush. The envelope was thick, the letterhead bold, Lang and Associates. I carried it to the kitchen table, set it beside my blue cup, and slid it open with the butter knife I always used for such things. I unfolded the pages. Settlement offer. The words stared up at me, neat, rehearsed. They proposed that I dissolve the trust in Lily's name and reinstate the estate plan from 2019. In exchange, they promised to cease all legal and reputational challenges. They wrote of family dignity, of unity, of avoiding unnecessary escalation. At the bottom were two signatures, Daniel and Marjorie. Nothing more. No lawyer. Just desperation dressed in civility. I read it twice, then once again, slower. Each line tried to fold itself into reason, into mercy. But the lie was loud in every sentence. They weren't offering peace. They were offering silence. Mine. I reached for my notepad, the same one I had used to write the running total of every check, every wire transfer, every just this once. On a blank page, I wrote my answer in 2 lines. No. My dignity was never yours to negotiate. The words sat clean and final against the white paper. No preamble, no apology, no loophole. I folded the page, slipped it into an envelope, and sealed it. On the front, I wrote their names in steady script. My hand did not waver. A few hours later, Lily arrived. She had called first this time, her voice steady but tired. She stepped inside with her usual jacket and tired eyes. When I handed her the envelope, she looked at me, puzzled. "Is this?" "My reply," I said. She opened it, read the 2 lines, and then looked back at me. Her lips parted, but no words came for a moment. Then she smiled, quiet and proud. "Can I mail it?" "Yes," I told her. "It should be your hands that send it." She tucked the envelope into her bag, zipped it carefully, as if she were carrying glass. After she left, I stood at the front window and watched her car pull away, the muffler rattling as it always did. The late afternoon light fell across the room, golden and unhurried. It touched the porcelain of my blue cup, turned the chip in its rim into a small glint of fire. I breathed deeply, shoulders loosening. For the first time in a long while, the silence around me felt light. There would be no more signatures stolen from me, only the ones I chose. And that day, I chose to sign my dignity into permanence. The morning broke gently, the kind of light that seeps in without hurry, gold spilling across the kitchen floorboards. I woke to quiet, no phone vibrating on the nightstand, no letters pressed into my mailbox like demands, just the rhythm of the house breathing with me, steady and untroubled. By mid-morning, Lily's car pulled into the drive. I heard the familiar cough of her muffler before the knock came. She didn't wait for me to open the door this time. She stepped inside with the ease of someone who belonged. In her hands was a white box tied with twine. "Cinnamon rolls," she said, setting them on the counter. "Still warm." We sat at the kitchen table together, the same table where I had sorted checks, torn letters, and signed my will anew. Now it was covered only with plates, napkins, and the smell of sugar and spice. She poured us both coffee, but I reached for my tea instead, cradling my blue cup as though it carried the weight of all the mornings I had survived. The porcelain was warm, the small chip on its rim catching the light. We ate slowly, in companionable silence. The rolls were soft, sticky at the edges, the kind of sweetness that lingers on the tongue. Lily smiled at me across the table, her eyes clearer than I'd seen in months. "He's gone quiet," she said at last. She didn't say his name, but we both knew. No calls, no letters. He even took down his social media accounts. I nodded. "Silence can be an exile. Sometimes it's also a surrender." "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked. I looked out the window where the maple tree stood nearly bare, only a few stubborn leaves clinging to the branches. "Not in the way he used to, and not in the way you fear. He may circle in his mind forever, but he doesn't live here anymore." Her shoulders eased. She picked at her napkin, then laughed softly. "It feels strange, doesn't it, to realize we don't have to brace ourselves for the next move?" "Strange," I agreed, "and welcome." We lingered over the last bites, letting the ordinary become sacred. For so long, meals had been punctured by tension, unspoken debts, half-truths, the looming shadow of expectation. Now, just sweetness and steam. After she left for class, promising to stop by later in the week, I remained at the table. The house was still, but not empty. Not anymore. I pulled my notebook toward me, the same one that had tallied the cost of decades and had carried my 2-line refusal of negotiation. On a fresh page, I wrote the final line I had been holding in my chest. "Let the silence I chose be the peace they never gave me." I read it once, twice. The words settled like dust after a long storm, soft and certain. I closed the notebook gently and set it atop the stack of documents in the drawer. They were all still mine. My will, my trust, my story. Not his. Never again. Then I lifted the blue cup, inhaling the faint floral steam of the tea, and drank. My hand was steady, my breath even. The light through the window shifted, gold deepening into amber. It caught in the porcelain. It warmed the wood. It wrapped me in something I had not felt in years. Not triumph, not vengeance. Just ease. Outside, life moved without drama. A boy pedaled past on a bike too small. A neighbor's dog barked at a squirrel. The postman shuffled by with his bag slung low. Ordinary things, beautiful things. I sat with them, a woman no longer erased, no longer waiting for the next theft of name or trust. A woman whose silence was no longer weaponized against her, but chosen, shaped, held. And as I looked out through the glass, tea in hand, I thought of all the others who had lived through their own quiet battles, Women who had been the foundation of families, then discarded like rubble. Women who never got to close the door and breathe again. This story, I knew, wasn't just mine. It belonged to anyone who had ever been told they were too old, too small, too late. To anyone who had carried burdens unacknowledged and then finally set them down. So if you are listening now and you recognize yourself somewhere in these words, if you've been silenced, doubted, rewritten, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not alone. And if you've ever faced something similar, I'd like to know. Leave a comment, tell your story. Do you think I did the right thing? Because sometimes healing is not found in applause or forgiveness. Sometimes it is found in the quiet act of standing, steadying your cup, and choosing your own peace at last.